Good morning, everybody. This is the week that the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, said would be the moment of truth as Theresa May heads off to Brussels to try and get the withdrawal agreement signed. Rumours are, and they've appeared in a German newspaper, because, like, the Germans get to look at this before the UK cabinet or anybody else. German newspapers saying the deal is already done. I suspect we are pretty much there. But David Davis today launches a pretty coruscating attack. In the Sunday Times, he urges a cabinet mutiny to kill off the PM's Brexit. But actually what he really means now is a cabinet mutiny to kill off the PM, because that, folks, is where we are now at. So it is going to be a huge week. Theresa May sticking firmly to her ideas, and we learnt over the course of the last week, certainly from a Brexiteer's perspective, that things are getting worse and worse. Now we're to be trapped in a customs union until at least the end of 2021, something, of course, through history, that if things are put in place permanently, temporarily, they stay there permanently. But let's listen to Theresa May a couple of days ago and how determined she is with her plan.
I do believe in Brexit, but crucially, I believe in delivering Brexit in a way that respects the vote and delivers on the vote of the British people, while also protecting our union, protecting jobs, and ensuring that we make a success of Brexit for the future. That's why I'm being ambitious for this country. That's why I want us to get a really good free trade deal with the European Union, which is what lies at the heart of the Chequers plan.
Well, I mean, how she can use the words free trade deal, and what she wants to do is to trap us in a customs union to stop us doing trade deals with any other part of the world, and to keep us under EU rules for at least until the end of 2021, I do not know. Much of this, of course, going back to last December, when she rushed across to meet Monsieur Barnier's deadline and signed up to the Irish backstop. Now, the question always with these things, when it comes to the crunch, is the whips, party discipline, MPs being told if you don't support the Prime Minister's deal, ultimately you'll let Jeremy Corbyn in. You could cause an election. You could even, if it all goes wrong, force a second referendum. So big pressure on the Eurosceptics, and big pressure that David Davis is putting on the cabinet ministers, but equally, we got Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's at the head of the European Research Group. There are 60 MPs in the group. Yesterday, he was speaking to a Brexiteers rally at a Leave Means Leave event in Torquay. In fact, I was sitting quite close to him when he said this.
As I point out to the whips, there are probably 39 Tory MPs who are more tough-minded on this issue than I am. I am not the most tough-minded amongst my friends within the Conservative Party. And those 39 will not turn. I will not turn.
They like that.
And there are growing numbers. There are growing numbers beyond that who are determined that we should deliver on the Brexit that we promised. Why? Because the future of our country is at stake. The future of our party is at stake. The opportunity for the United Kingdom is within grasp. It is so exciting. We are so nearly there. We must make sure that Chequers is binned, that this idea of a customs union, this sheer lunacy of paying £3.5 billion a year to subsidise the European Union for all eternity is binned. We are so close. We are almost there. We just need to be steady for a few more weeks. And if we do that, the prize is there to be grasped. With your support, we will grasp it.
So there we are. Jacob is not for turning, is what I took out of that. So he is saying it doesn't matter what pressure is put upon him, and there are 39 people in the Conservative Parliamentary Party even more Eurosceptic than him. So you'd think, looking at all of this, that the Prime Minister faces a very difficult task. Now, through the history of the European debate in this country, it has always split political parties. It's led to several crises. And earlier on this morning, I spoke to the doyen of political commentators, Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. And I asked him, how bad was this political crisis compared to the others?
Well, of course, what is interesting about the current political crisis is that we have both of our political parties, having serious internal divisions more broadly, but certainly particularly divided over this issue of Brexit. And I think what's beginning to emerge is that if Theresa May is going to get whatever deal that she emerges from the negotiations through the House of Commons, it's going to be done most likely on the back of a split both in her own party and in the Labour Party. Certainly, it seems unlikely that she is, at the end of the day, going to succeed in satisfying everybody in the European Research Group, that is, the harder Brexiteers led by Jacob Rees-Mogg, and at the same time, everybody in the soft Conservative camp, such as Anna Soubry and Kenneth Clarke, and that therefore at least some losses of Conservative support is going to happen, and that therefore she will be reliant on support of the Labour Party. She probably can count on the support of the half dozen or so Labour MPs, such as Kate Hoey, who have been supporting the government generally because they're in favour of leave. The interesting question is, does she then get a somewhat broader group of MPs, such as Caroline Flint, who perhaps themselves are pro-Remain, but who feel it's incumbent for the Labour Party to acknowledge the concerns of Leave voters, and who certainly are concerned that if Parliament were to vote against the deal, we might be heading for no deal. So the truth is, therefore, we are in extraordinarily fluid times, because one of the things I think one has to realise is that once the position is that the whips on both sides of the House of Commons cannot necessarily command their troops, that nobody can be sure what's going to happen. And then, of course, we add into the mix the fact that the DUP and the government's junior allies are also now creating a great deal of noise. Now, we should remember, however, Europe does have form in this respect. If we actually go back to the bill that got us into the European community in the first place, that only got through because some Labour rebels, led by the late Roy Jenkins, voted with the government and thereby enabled the government to overcome its own rebels. And of course, as we've been hearing this week from former Prime Minister John Major, who also, by the way, he did technically have a majority inside the House of Commons between 92 and 97, but it was a pretty thin one, and therefore, as a result, whenever the hard Brexit, those MPs who are most Eurosceptic began to make a noise, and he had a rather unfortunate word for them, made a noise. He was potentially under pressure. He was potentially at risk of losing, and indeed he did lose a crucial vote as the Maastricht bill, the bill that was implementing the so-called Maastricht Treaty, went through. He also was potentially vulnerable, and again, an indication of how Europe divides parties, and when a government doesn't have a majority or only has a small majority, then indeed it can cause an awful lot of angst, and does indeed leave prime ministers wondering about, well, what do I not need to do in order to ensure that I can keep my troops on side? And that essentially is the dilemma that Theresa May is facing in spades as she tries
she certainly is.
Brussels and come back.
She certainly is.
Yeah.
But John Major, see, I remember this very clearly, John, because I was willing on, as you can imagine, the Maastricht rebels. And this is before I decided to ruin the next 25 years of my life by getting involved directly in politics. And I remember what Major did, that in the end, there were 27 of them, I think, who voted against the third reading, 7 abstentions. And in the end, what Major did is he made it an issue of confidence. And he said to Bill Cash, Bill, if you vote against me, there'll be a general election and John Smith will get in. Is it likely that for Mrs May to actually get whatever deal she gets this week in Brussels, and I'm assuming that she will, is it likely she would use that same trick again?
Well, the truth is, of course, the rules of the game have changed since then. We have that little thing called the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, which in this situation makes a fundamental difference. Now, John Major was able to say, if you vote against this bill again, I'm going to call a general election. The Prime Minister no longer has the ability to call a general election of their own volition. They can only call a general election basically if they get the agreement of the opposition. Now, maybe Jeremy Corbyn, as was the case last year, the only reason why we had an early election last year is because when Theresa May said, I want election, Jeremy Corbyn said, I agree with you. If Jeremy Corbyn had said no, then it couldn't have happened. So the point, therefore, is that actually, and this is one of the scenarios we're potentially facing, it may well be, let's, for the purpose of argument, assume that the government does lose the so-called meaningful vote when Theresa May has her deal. Now, there is no doubt that in the wake of that, there will be a formal vote of no confidence put down in the Commons. If the government itself doesn't do it, then certainly the Labour Party will do so. Now, it's quite possible that, however, that then when that formal vote of no confidence goes through, which if the government were to lose could possibly precipitate a general election under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, that actually MPs vote in favour of the government. And so the government loses the meaningful vote, but actually it still manages to win a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. Therefore, there is no mechanism for calling a general election. And certainly this has led a question that, that at the end of the day, the government may well find that it can't get what it wants through, but because it can no longer say to MPs, but if you vote against this, you're going to have to face the electorate, the MPs will say, well, actually, we can do something about that, Prime Minister. We won't. Now, of course, we then get into the realm of speculation. I think, of course, the realpolitik of the situation is that if the Prime Minister does lose the meaningful vote, it will be very difficult for her to carry on.
Survive, yeah.
And that in any event, somehow or another, we will end up with a general election. But this will not be something that's in Theresa May's hands, and she does not have the same weapon that John Major or indeed every Prime Minister until David Cameron had before of being able to say, if you vote against, I will make you face the electorate. She no longer, on her own at least, has that power. And that does therefore tilt the balance of advantage to some degree away from the Prime Minister now as compared to the past.
So Sir John Curtis there basically saying that the Prime Minister is in trouble, and she is in trouble. David Davis launching an absolute broadside, not just against the customs union proposals, but effectively against her premiership. So what should Tory MPs do? Who should they listen to? Theresa May or David Davis? If you think Theresa May, stick with the party leader, be loyal. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think Davis is right, that effectively the Prime Minister is betraying Brexit and the time has come for Cabinet Ministers and MPs to act, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think we shouldn't be listening to either of them. Maybe there are other figures in the wings who need to take this on, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers, you can comment there too. The time is now 10:16. So Mrs May says that her Chequers deal, and indeed now the new customs union proposal, is delivering on Brexit. David Davis says in today's Sunday Times, this is one of the most fundamental decisions that government has taken in modern times. It is time for our cabinet members to exert their collective authority. This week, the authority of our constitution is on the line. Who should Tory MPs listen to? David Davis or Theresa May? Well, I have to tell you, I thought Chequers was bad. I really was very, very upset by that July Chequers proposal. What is now being put forward, that we enter into an open-ended commitment to stay part of a customs union, isn't just betraying Brexit. It is willful dishonesty that is being shown by the Prime Minister to the British public. We, as part of that customs union that could last for years and years and years, and certainly minimum to the end of 2021, would not be able to control our borders, would probably have to contribute another 15 billion sterling on top of the 39 billion she's agreed already, would prevent us from doing trade deals around the rest of the world, and is directly contrary to what people voted for on Brexit. It's a big risk to bring down the Prime Minister at this moment in time because, the clock is ticking. We're told that Andrea Leadsom, Esther McVeigh, Penny Mordaunt and Dominic Raab are all considering their positions. There will be a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning before late on Wednesday or early on Thursday Mrs May heads off to Brussels for this summit. And I have to say, I do think David Davis is right. This is so far away from Brexit. It's much better now to take the risk for those cabinet ministers to resign, get rid of her and press the reset button. That's what I think. What does Keith in Stoke Newington think? Good morning, Keith.
Morning, Nigel. Yes, I think David Davis is absolutely correct. And I don't think we're ever going to get a proper deal with the EU because they hate us. They've hated us since the 1600s when we beat them on international trade. And they've always been totally jealous. And they're terrified of our economic and international trade.
Not everybody. I mean, come on, Keith. Not everybody in Europe hates us.
Well, all right, okay. Well, let's say Barnier and all those guys who are the EU.
The bureaucrats, you mean?
The bureaucrats, but those countries, France, Spain, Dutch, Portuguese, were always frightened of us because we beat them on international trade, and they've been trying to stop us ever since. And when we signed up to the EU, that's exactly what happened. They were able to control us in competition. I mean, in the 60s, the Germans wanted the City of London to be transferred over to Germany, if you remember that.
Okay. I mean, Keith, I do understand your point. It's a pretty tough line you're pushing. Are you saying we should just walk away because we're wasting our time negotiating at all?
Absolutely. You see, what these Remainers are trying to do, they're trying to eliminate risk, and you can't eliminate risk because, for example, to explain that point, in 1600, when those first traders went out to trade internationally, when England was just an offshoot of Europe, France and Spain were the big players, there were no insurance companies, there was no banks, and there was incredible risk.
Keith, of course, entrepreneurship means risk. Interestingly, Keith, your point backed up very strongly by Tim Martin of Wetherspoons, who actually says a no-deal Brexit is the best thing for the UK economy. Let's move on to Anthony and Staines. Good morning, Anthony.
Oh yes, good morning, Nigel.
So, what do you make of David Davis this morning?
What a failed ex-Brexit minister. Not so much backseat driving as in the sidecar, and the sidecar fell off sort of about 100 miles down the motorway.
Well, you say that, Anthony, but there are some who now think that he might be the ideal person to be a caretaker prime minister to see us through Brexit.
Oh dear, please no. I mean, that's just such a ludicrous idea.
Well, I promise you it's being touted.
Well, it may be touted, but I think, Mr. Blobby is also being touted as Prime Minister.
Get away with you. So, Anthony, all right, so if you don't take David Davis seriously, do you think that the Prime Minister's customs union proposal is consistent with the Brexit vote?
No, I don't, but unfortunately we have a thing called the economy, which she has to keep together, along with another thing called United Kingdom. And this is her sort of monumental task that she has to pull off.
Right.
She has to, obviously, I think, concede quite considerably to the Brexiteers almost at the last minute. She's going to have to really avoid being sent to the gallows.
Because that is how it looks, Anthony, is that? I mean, I even noticed this morning that Daniel Hannan MEP, who I'm not a great fan of because he supported the Chequers deal, but even he says this morning in the Sunday Telegraph, we've now gone so far with this customs union deal that it's just not acceptable. So she is on the verge of losing, isn't she?
No, because I think her hand is much stronger than you give her credit.
Go on.
Because, we look at the results of I don't want to go about old ground here, but 2 out of the 4 countries of the UK voted to remain, and one being, of course, Northern Ireland. And this is where I think Foster is on particularly weak ground. She's on weak ground already because her record is not good on the green scheme, on the energy failed scheme in Northern Ireland, and on the Assembly, which she presided over its failure.
She did,
so
but I mean, it's interesting, Anthony, isn't it? Whilst Northern Ireland, principally because of Sinn Féin's shift of position, but Northern Ireland did vote Remain. When you see the opinion polls, would they like to leave the United Kingdom? The figures are still very low.
Yes, indeed. And that's why Foster is playing with fire, literally. If she torches the woodpile, she's already torched the woodpile in Northern Ireland.
But I mean, they're threatening now. I mean, they're now saying that actually maybe no deal is the best solution for Northern Ireland.
No, I don't think so, because the Northern Ireland is the place that's going to suffer, the place that will suffer the worst in the event of any kind of ruination of our economy. Northern Ireland. Actually,
the Republic of Ireland would suffer the most, I think.
Indeed,
because I mean, nearly 50% of their beef and food and drink exports come to our country. But so I don't see. I mean, you're arguing that the Prime Minister's got a strong hand, Anthony. She hasn't with the DUP. Is she, as I sort of thought from her conference speech onwards, is she going to have to rely on Labour support, just as Ted Heath did back in 1972 to get us into the common market?
Yes, because the EU isn't that popular an idea in the country as a whole. It never has been. So nobody really wanted this thing. But my main point I was going to come to, which I mentioned your research, is a thing called Scotland.
Yep.
And a party called the SNP.
Who hate the Tory party.
Well, yes.
Viscerally.
But let's face it, the Tories spoke to the IRA, didn't they, for years? We didn't know about it.
Yes.
And I think that something could be cobbled together with the SNP, as unlikely as it sounds.
Okay, no, it's a very interesting... I mean, to be honest, Anthony, it's a great call, because nobody anywhere that I've read or heard has suggested that the SNP could be the party that comes to bail out a Conservative Prime Minister. It's an interesting point. I understand why you're saying it, because they, of course, want to stay in customs union, single markets, whatever they can. Fascinating. Thank you. Yvonne is a new caller from Luton. Good morning, Yvonne.
Hello there.
So, which side do you support? I mean, if you were a Tory MP, Yvonne, or a Tory cabinet minister,
I would be voting for David Davis as Prime Minister.
Would you?
I think that Theresa May is doing this to spite the Leavers, and I think she's either getting a backhander, or someone's got something on her, maybe that Ollie bloke, or she's having because I actually did some points, sort of bullet points. Maybe she's really cunning, and it's a way to get no deal without getting the blame for it if it all goes wrong. Or she will be personally, her or her husband will be personally losing money somehow if it doesn't go her way.
Do you think, I mean, Yvonne, is she somebody in a very difficult position?
She's in a
is she willfully trying to deceive the British public?
I think she's going to, either she's going to, maybe in the last minute, she's going to do a quick U-turn and just to try and wrong for everyone.
Well, but she's only
she's
got till Thursday night, because Thursday night's the big meeting. It's the moment of truth, Mr. Barnier has said.
I can't understand how stupid she can be, so that's why I'm thinking it must be she's getting a backhander. Somebody's got something over.
No, you can't, Yvonne. You can't say on a Sunday morning on LBC that the Prime Minister's getting a backhander.
No, I can't understand how stupid.
Well, you know, someone said to me yesterday that she now looks a bit like Charles I. She can't see that no one actually supports her ideology or her position anymore, and she'll keep her head, but she may lose her job. Yvonne, I thank you very much indeed. Lots of passion. Scotty says the best Brexit solution would be to cancel it. Ain't going to happen, Scotty. I was in Devon yesterday, where I can promise you, in Leave voting constituencies, they still want Brexit, maybe even more strongly than they ever did before. John on Facebook says David Davis is right. She betrays Brexit, and it will be the end of the Conservative Party. Norman Lamont, former Chancellor, today, writing in the Mail on Sunday, if we stick with Mrs May's plan, we will let Corbyn in. We're in for one hell of a week. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 10:30, and David Davis is urging the Cabinet to mutiny over Mrs May's Brexit plans just ahead of the Brussels summit later on this week. What he really means is get rid of her as leader. That is the truth of it. Should they listen? Should the Cabinet, should Tory MPs listen to him or listen to Mrs May? What does Mike in Leatherhead think on this Sunday morning? Hello, Mike.
Hi, I'm 100% behind David Davis because he's a Democrat and the others are bureaucrats. And if you vote for bureaucracy, which is impossible logically, you vote for Theresa May, who is actually very successful in the Home Office because she was a bureaucrat.
Yes,
and that's the reason. People are wondering why she behaves like this, because she has the mindset of a bureaucrat. And the bureaucrats, she may think she's a Democrat. That's the illusion.
Yeah.
But the bureaucrats think they should be running the country because they're smarter.
Well, I think they are.
Unfortunately.
I think Ollie Robbins is running the Brexit process, isn't he?
Of course. But bureaucrats will inevitably work only for 30% of the population, because they will look after their own interests. That's why we have all these problems. 70% of the population are neglected.
Okay, no, well, listen.
That's the problem.
Mike, on your criticism of bureaucrats, I've been doing battle with the Brussels bureaucrats for a couple of decades, so I'm with you on that basic point about bureaucrats. But tell me about David Davis. I mean, do you think he's got the qualities to be leader in this, sort of caretaker PM in this situation?
I know he resigned over a constitutional matter in 2010, and he's been slow to be stirred, but, he actually put his seat on the line over, I'm not sure what it was, but you probably might remember what it was about.
It was all to do with corpus juris, with habeas corpus being extended.
Yes.
The amount of time you could be held without charge, and it was all part of the Terrorism Act, and David Davis resigned and forced a by-election, basically saying that if you allow the state to keep people without charge for longer, far from helping combat terrorism, they've actually won. That was really his point.
Yes, and he got his seat back. So I think, and again, he may not be leader, but there's a lot of them, like Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson. Like you say, there's 60, 70 MPs with high principles, and they could steer the thing. But at the moment, Theresa May is going to come back from Munich waving a piece of paper, talking about peace in our time.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not.
You're saying she's the appeaser, and she is.
I have called her. I have called her Theresa the appeaser on LBC for quite some time. Mike, there are some not happy with David Davis. I mean, Kevin on Facebook says DD had 2 years negotiating with the EU and came back with nothing, and now the Brexiteers want him? ? Is that a fair criticism of DD?
Our country is run by bureaucrats, and people do not realise we actually don't have a democracy. I mean, if we lose this, we should turn the House of Commons into a theme park, like the Royal...
Well, no, I get it, Mike, I get it, thank you. Now, the other story that is out there today and is extraordinary, and I spoke just before I came on air to former International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell, because it's this story of the disappearance of this journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. You know, he goes into the Saudi embassy in Istanbul 12 days ago, and no one's heard sight nor sound of him. Rumours that he was tortured, dismembered and removed from the building. No one knows. He certainly hasn't appeared. And overnight, Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry has said that we should apply the same standards to Saudi Arabia that we do to Russia. I asked Andrew Mitchell what he thought of that.
The point I hope she's making is that international law, human rights, these things apply to everyone, regardless of where they come from. And in that respect, Britain should show the same abhorrence we rightly did over Salisbury and the Russian activity there to what appears to have happened in Turkey at the hands of the Saudi authorities. But I would make the key point that we still don't know for sure what happened. We look to the Saudi and Turkish authorities to tell everyone what did happen in an open and transparent way. And if the Saudi authorities or those in control of the consulate in Istanbul are not able or willing to do so, then I think it's incumbent on the Turkish authorities who clearly are the sovereign power there and have access to electronic and other means of securing this information, to bring that information into the public domain so everyone can see it.
OK, but I mean, we did act against Russia, didn't we, before we had absolute proof of what had happened?
Well, I think we had there we were in the hands of our own security services, and I think we knew from a very early stage what had happened, so we were pretty confident.
Okay.
In this case, there is a considerable amount of circumstantial evidence, but I'm just saying that standing up for international humanitarian law also means not prejudging the issue, and I think we need certainty and openness and transparency. And then the international community needs to take a view and act.
Yes, I mean, very interestingly, later on in the month, there's a big event called the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, which is called the Davos of the Desert, where, you know, big companies and global investors turn up. And, of course, the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, is supposed to go to that summit. Do you think he just sort of has to wait to make a decision on further evidence?
I think he probably does, and I'm very confident that Liam Fox would make the right decision. Of course, we've already seen Richard Branson, one of our most distinguished and well-known entrepreneurs, make it clear he won't go. We've seen the head of the World Bank make a similar decision. But I'm very confident that on behalf of our government, Liam Fox will make the right decision when he has all the facts.
Yeah, and this is very awkward for Donald Trump, isn't it? Because Trump, when he became president, decided that the Iranian Shias were the enemy, that the Saudi Sunnis were the friends. His first overseas speech was in Saudi. They're opening up many business contacts. Does this bring into question the judgment of the American administration to go so pro-Saudi Arabia?
Well, you know, the stance of the American administration, which has huge power in the Middle East and huge ability to influence, is one that many of us would like to see exercised in a slightly different direction. But on the issue of the apparent murder of this journalist, it does appear that the president is making the right point. He's saying he wants to know what happened. He's saying that killing a journalist, an internationally respected journalist like this, is a very serious attack on everybody's freedom. That's the sort of thing one might not expect Donald Trump to say, but he has said it.
Yep.
So I think so far the reaction that he has given in his position as a leader of the free world is an impressive one.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And we're coming up this week. Theresa May's off to Brussels. What prospects do you think she has of getting a deal in Brussels?
Well, I think we're all behind her in trying to secure a deal that honours the decision made by the British public in the referendum. And obviously, it's facile of me to suggest there wasn't a great deal of turbulence, particularly in the Conservative Party on this point at the moment.
Yeah.
But the point I would make is that we do have to leave, and were we not to do so and were to become just a rule taker, then that is a recipe for disaster, because all the people who voted Remain would say, we were a rule maker, we're now just a rule taker, this is unsustainable, we need to continue campaigning. And all the people like you, Nigel, who have been determined that we should leave, will say, well, we haven't properly left. So I think leaving as a rule taker is a recipe for turmoil in British politics endlessly, and will be a very bad decision.
That sounds like even more bad news for Mrs May coming from Andrew Mitchell. And I talked there about Donald Trump, and it is interesting because his first overseas trip was to Saudi Arabia. He, clear decision. We back Saudi. We think Iran are the bad guys. Some big business interests with Saudi Arabia and the Americans, just equally, folks, as there are here. Have you noticed how uncritical over the years the British government has been of Saudi Arabia, despite the fact we know that the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia have been funding all sorts of extremism in our country, Germany and elsewhere. And Trump, I think, he is in a very difficult position over this.
Well, there are many other things we could do, but when we take away $110 billion of purchases from our country, that hurts our workers, that hurts our factories, that hurts all of our companies. You're talking about 500,000 jobs.
So there are 500,000 American jobs dependent on trade with Saudi Arabia. If we punish them, it's going to hurt us. Interesting, isn't it? Very much. I mean, Trump just being more public about it, but very much the same position the British government's taken with Saudi Arabia for a very, very long time. Back to, who should the Cabinet listen to? Who should MPs listen to within the Conservative Party? David Davis or Theresa May? James is calling from Harlow.
Hi, mate. The problem we've got is they're not actually listening to neither. I've been doing a documentary about this on YouTube.
Yep.
The problem is we're not in control of our own parties no more. The Brexit the problem I had with them was they acted like after we left Europe all our problems would be gone.
Yep.
But they're not going to be, because part of them are, but we still need to deal with the rot at home, if you know what I mean.
Well, of course we do, yeah. I mean, no one, James, said that Brexit would solve all of our problems.
And if you look at... I'll give you an interesting
But it does give us the ability. Brexit gives us the ability to be back fully in control. Yeah, OK.
I did support Brexit.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, if you look at the list of companies that come out heavily for Remain, right, we're subsidising these companies. They're not making us any profit. Most of them aren't.
Is that because they're being subsidised through European Union funds or through green energy grants, or what's the reason?
No, it's basically our country's acting like a mob. They're taking money from the poorer businesses and people and giving them in subsidies to the big companies to top them up, a bit like the feudal system we had before 1852.
Well, James, I certainly have seen a transference of wealth from poor to rich through things like wind energy, that's for certain. James, just very quickly, if you were a cabinet minister and Mrs May headed off to Brussels and signed up a deal on the basis that we understand with the customs union, would it be right to resign and risk bringing down the government?
I'd do more than that. I would stand up in Parliament and say, this government's a sham, we're corrupt, we need constitutional change, sacked a lot of us. OK, very good. Wow,
sort of shades of the English Civil War there from James in Harlow. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:45. David Davis is urging a cabinet rebellion. We're told that 4 cabinet ministers will meet tomorrow night over pizza, we're told, or takeaway food, to discuss what their tactics will be at the cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning. Either way, it's a big week. Who should MPs follow if they're in the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister or David Davis? Gianluca is a new caller from Wadhurst down in East Sussex. Good morning to you.
Hi, Nigel. Good morning to you. So let me just start saying that I'm not one of your fans, but I was listening to the radio this morning, and I thought I was going to give you a call to give you my view on this. So
please do.
Yeah, so my view is this one. It's that I find it interesting that Theresa May, which I'm not really supporting her at all, I'm not a big fan of the Tory party, but she's in a very tough position. However, what I find even more interesting is that you have people like David Davis, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and the entire ERG group, which they keep shooting from the fence without ever coming up with a proper alternative plan. And they fail repeatedly to do so. And the reason they repeatedly fail to do so is because Brexit is just fantasy land. What people being promised cannot be delivered.
So are you saying that for a country to want to be independent and self-governing is fantasy land?
No, what I'm saying is that in 2018, the entire mantra of taking back full control is not real. But in 2018, the international world and international dealing with each other is based on compromise, is based on treaties. Even after the UK get out of the EU, and you probably know better than anyone else because you've been in the European Parliament for many, many years, the UK will still have to comply with WTO rules, United Nations rules, agency which regulate how you sell medicine, whether it's the United States or whether the European market. There is not one country in 2018 which can do exactly what it wants.
We live in
when you're talking about
we live in an interdependent world. We live in an interdependent world, and we trade with each other. Interdependent, but you can be an independent country operating in an interdependent world. And surely the point here is that, you know, the vast majority, so 75% plus of all our business rules, everything from employment legislation to environmental law, wasn't being adjudged, Gianluca, by electors at general elections. It was being made somewhere else. And Brexit was to say we should be in...
somewhere else? Nigel, sorry. What is that somewhere else? That somewhere else was a European Parliament, which was elected. That's why
No. Don't delude yourself. Don't delude yourself about the European Parliament.
Hold on a second. There was a European Parliament which was elected and is still elected. That's why people like you were elected. There was a commission. The commission was selected by the Council of Europe, which is formed by every single prime minister, which has been elected again.
Who voted for Mr. Juncker? Who voted for Mr. Tusk? Who voted for Mr. Barnier? Gianluca, we didn't vote for any of them. Look, I tell you what,
I'm sorry.
This is a different debate. Gianluca, I'm sorry. Your own home country of Italy is now rebelling against this.
Let me just finish one point.
So David, finish this point. Is David Davis right or is Theresa May right?
About democratic representation, right? Talk about democratic representation. Let me just finish one point, right? David Cameron was sitting on European Council and for Theresa May, both elected by British public.
Yeah.
You are sitting in the middle.
Gianluca, please, we are not debating this. All I will tell you is this. I will tell you this one simple fact. Once something becomes European law, there is nothing an elector can do in any general election in Europe to change it. That's the point I'm making. We can argue about EU structures till the cows come home. Let's head off to Germany, to Tübingen, to talk to Robert, another new caller to this show. Morning, Robert.
Good morning, Nigel. It's nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. Welcome.
Unlike Gianluca, I am an admirer of yours. And I want to thank
I'm very happy to take. I'm very happy to take any opinion on this show. It's just that the difficulty is that we try and debate a subject, and we tend to get sidetracked off into so many other things. And
I know. Well, somebody needs to tell Gianluca that sovereignty doesn't mean isolationism.
Well, that's right. I mean, I know. Anyway, to the point of debate. You know what we're talking about here, and I'm going to carry on this conversation beyond the top of the hour. Is we have elected members of Parliament, some of them now sitting in the cabinet in the Conservative Party. They've got to make some big decisions, Robert, in terms of their own loyalties. Now, should they, if they want to honour the Brexit result, be listening to David Davis or Theresa May? And that's what I want to discuss.
Nigel, they should be listening to Jacob Rees-Mogg. I watched your conference yesterday from Torquay, and you've obviously met him many times, but I thought he was so statesmanlike yesterday. I mean, presumably you spoke to him after or before the conference.
Well, I spoke to him before, during and afterwards. I have to say, I've watched him many times, personally, and during the referendum we did a couple of things together. I thought yesterday Jacob Rees-Mogg was the best I've ever seen him. I thought measured, very much in control of detail, but very, very determined, but in a sort of slightly quiet, understated way. Now, I thought he was impressive, Robert, I have to say.
He's upped the ante since Chequers, hasn't he? His language has changed slightly, and yesterday I thought he was his usual eloquent self, but he also had a popular touch, if you like. The room seemed to respond.
Well, yes, I mean, he said the EU Commission and the negotiators are behaving like bullies. I suggest we stand up to bullies, which was, quite strong stuff.
Rousing, and I think the Leave campaign should emphasise this punishment Brexit scenario that Jacob was speaking about yesterday. Instead of playing it down, why doesn't the Leave campaign say, yes, it might well happen. There might be a no deal. There might be some possibility of disruption for a few weeks or months. Call upon the wartime spirit. Call upon the spirit of 1940. Say, we'll get through it. There might be a few logjams on the motorway, but we'll get through it.
John Longworth yesterday, the former boss of the British Chambers of Commerce, and Tim Martin from Wetherspoons were both saying, actually, a no deal is the right solution. Even if there are short-term bumps in the road, it's the right thing to do. We can have, Tim's argument is we can have cheaper food, we can have cheaper bras, cheaper shoes, and all the rest of it by doing this. So there is an argument now beginning to emerge that says no deal, no problem, although the establishment make us feel like we're falling off a cliff. I'm not sure where we're going to go with this, Robert, but I just have a feeling that the sands of time are running out for Mrs May. Thank you. I've got one last quick call on this subject, if I may. Going to go to Barry in Guildford. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, just to say, I am a fan of yours. I like people who speak the truth. But what I was wondering, I don't know anything about the I think that's the same with everybody. I don't think we really know what it's all about. But why does Theresa May have to... She's on her own there with a whole bunch of other people. Why don't 2 or 3 or 4 members of the Parliament go to the meetings and help her sort it out?
Well, the trouble is, Barry, that she has chosen a course of action. She has worked incredibly closely with the civil service. She is, in the view of many people, now pushing towards, effectively, a Remainers form of Brexit.
Yes.
It's almost too late, isn't it?
We don't need it.
She isn't going to change course now. She can't change course now. If you believe the German newspapers, the deal's been done already. The question is, does the party stick with her or does it ditch her? Barry, I'm going to have to let you go. I'm sorry those last few callers were short. Lots of people wanted to get their point of view in. Well, heading into the next hour, I want to stick with this theme. MPs, cabinet ministers are now facing some really tough choices. Winston Churchill said the first duty of a member of Parliament is to do what is right for the honour and safety of Great Britain and then to represent their constituents. Right at the bottom, he put party loyalty. As the great Brexit debate hots up, who should MPs be representing? Themselves, you, or the country? What are their duties and responsibilities? Call 0345 6060 973. Who's the boss? Are the MPs in charge, or are you in charge? Text to 84850 and tweet whatever you like to Farage and LBC at LBC, and if it's clean, I promise I'll read it out, and it all starts next. So an MP gets elected for a constituency and they're there as your representative. And we define this really by going way back to 1774 and Edmund Burke, where he says your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he betrays, instead of serving you, if he sacrifices it to your opinion. So what Burke was saying was that you vote for a member of Parliament, and he or she now, of course, because, things have changed, for that period of 4 or 5 years, make their own judgment on decisions, and you then, at the end of that 4 or 5 year period, judge whether they're the right person to go on doing it. But they should not be swayed by you in the short term just because you believe in something very strongly. And we've always had a system of representative democracy, but does that change when you've had a national referendum? Because what you've done is you've said, right, we are not going to use normal representative democracy. We're going to outsource it straight back to you. You're going to make a decision, and we send you a government leaflet saying that you make that decision and we will abide by it. So you've got that going on. But equally, Churchill's saying that, the first duty of a Member of Parliament is to act for the honour and safety of the country, and that secondly, the constituents. And way down the list, Churchill saw party loyalty. And yet, isn't the truth of it, folks, that most of the men and women that go to Westminster now are simply lobby fodder, that they are given a 3-line whip from their party and they march through the lobbies? Because I promise you, what is going to happen between now and the end of the year as we face great votes, and perhaps one big decisive vote in the House of Commons, is those MPs are going to be pulled in different directions. Do they represent a Leave constituency? Do they represent a Remain constituency? How did they vote themselves? Should they vote to honour the referendum? Should they vote for their own judgment? Or should they simply do what the party whips tell them under the threat of deselection? It's a really important moment, I think, coming up here for our faith and belief in the entire democratic process. I'm going to go to Helen in Exeter and ask her what she makes of this.
Well, they have to go with the country, because without the country, they wouldn't have a job.
So the country voted for Brexit. Does that, in your view, mean that MPs are duty-bound to support us leaving the European Union treaties?
Yes.
But presumably they are at liberty if they don't like how it's being done to amend that?
We were told what Brexit meant.
Right.
Spent £9 million of our money telling us on a leaflet that I promptly sent back to him because I knew exactly what it meant.
Yep.
And the people I've spoken to just can't wait for it to happen, and they don't like what Theresa May is doing. And unfortunately, she's going to destroy the Conservative Party. The very, very good parliamentarians that we have will no longer be in power.
Helen, I was in your.
Do you know something?
I was in your county yesterday. I wasn't.
I know, and I'm very upset I missed that.
Well, I wasn't too far away from you in Torquay, and I was very struck that in Torquay and most of Devon. I know people like Ben Bradshaw from Labour represent Exeter.
I know he won the Remain. For the Remain.
Well, he's very much, he is very much he's very much a Remain supporter there. But the rest of Devon is blue. The rest of Devon are Conservative seats with quite big Conservative majorities. And what I sensed, not just at the rally I did yesterday, but going up and down the high street and in and out of a couple of pubs, what I did sense was, as you say, a lot of people in Conservative, strong Leave areas not very happy. But someone like Ben Bradshaw, who voted Remain, who believes in Remain, do you think he should actually make sure that we do leave the European Union because that's how the country voted?
Yes, I do.
OK, all right, Helen. So Helen strongly believes that it's the MP's duty, in this case, to support Leave because that decision was given back to us. I can't believe this. We've got a new caller here called Thomas from Seoul in South Korea. Good evening there, Thomas, I guess, isn't it?
All right, I guess it is good morning there, Nigel, isn't it?
It certainly is, yes. So, Thomas, what are MPs' responsibilities? They're facing a big, big moment coming up in the next couple of months.
Well, I'm Korean, and I'm very enthusiastic about the parliamentary democracy.
Yes.
And I think it is very appropriate that MPs should make their own decisions in urgent situations, such as, if the Prime Minister summons the House for urgent voting, like she was criticised when she didn't summon the House when she ordered to bomb Syria, didn't she?
Yeah.
And then party whips are threatening their MPs to vote for them, or they'll face deselection, or maybe the removal of the whip. Like, for example, Liberal Democrat MP Stephen Lloyd was was threatened or actually persuaded by Sir Vince Cable to vote for Remain, even though his constituency voted Leave. So Mr. Lloyd tried to vote Leave in Parliament, but he failed because of Sir Vince Cable.
But Thomas, I mean, normally, we expect MPs to exercise their own judgment, though we know the weakness of parliamentary democracy is party discipline. But in this particular, you've obviously studied this, Thomas, in this particular case, we had a referendum. We didn't act under the normal rules of representative democracy. We asked the people to make a decision. We promised the people we would abide by it. Are MPs who try and stop Brexit from happening, are they actually acting against the interests of the country?
Well, I think if MPs use their own decisions to vote either to leave properly or remain properly inside the European Union, I think that is not the parliament democracy that I was thinking about. I think MPs should follow what their boss says, and their boss should be the people.
Absolutely.
Not the party whip.
Thomas, that's a great point. Thank you. Thomas makes the ultimate point here, that in the end, it's the people that are the boss, even under representative democracy, because we lend MPs that power. We lend it to them for 4 or 5 years. They then give it back to us at elections. Ultimately, we are the people who need to be the bosses, not politicians, and certainly not civil servants. Peter is a regular caller to this show, and he's calling from Wimbledon. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Nigel. I'd like to I'll probably have to disappoint you slightly on the first point about the Italian caller when you talking about law. If EU law contradicts domestic law, UK judges can apply a bill of incapabilities to EU law. So when you said it's if EU passes the law, there is nothing we can do about it.
Peter, I said that once something becomes European law, there is nothing the voters can do democratically to change that law, was the point I made. Let's debate that another time, all right? Otherwise we're going to get sidetracked, as I was with Jean-Luc. But Peter, we've got, as I say, some really big moments coming up here where MPs are going to be pulled in all sorts of different directions. Where should the ultimate loyalty of an MP lie, and particularly in the wake of a constitutional referendum?
Well, I feel very strongly about this, Nigel, as you know. And the thing is, in my opinion, what should happen is MPs should act what's in the best interest of the country as a whole. And let me give you an analogy. For instance, imagine one day majority of people voted to jump off the cliff for some non-particular reason, because they've been told they'll be able to fly.
But they wouldn't do that, Peter, because...
And just imagine... Nigel, let me finish. Let me finish. And imagine there is no safety net in place, there is no parachute, people decided to jump. And in my opinion, the job of MPs is either put a safety net in place, give them parachutes, or build the wall in front of the cliff to stop it from happening. Because a lot of people who voted for what you wanted to happen, which is Brexit, voted on the false promises. Those promises are going to be delivered. And you yourself admitted, Nigel, that the country is going to be worse off. My question to you is this.
Peter, I said in the referendum, whether we're better off or worse off is not what this question in the referendum is. I think we could be a lot better off. But what I think's irrelevant, because you could put me up against an economist, we could both have different points of view. My point, Peter, was that this was a constitutional referendum and we were voting to change the legal status of our country to become independent again, and that is what people chose. I cannot see how anybody can say that I made a false promise there.
Well, the first problem is, first you're claiming we're not independent. We are independent. We have our own parliament. Our own parliament passes our laws.
Puppet parliament.
We're part of a biggest trading bloc in the world. This country has benefited greatly from being a member of the EU.
Well, I don't think it has. Peter, I don't think it has. And you and I, right? Fine. Look, you and I have a different point of view, right? That was fought out in the referendum. We had the Leave campaign. You had every global government on your side. But as it happened, the people made a decision and they voted to leave. And you talk about safety nets. Well, £39 billion is quite a big safety net if we leave on WTO rules. So you could argue that there is an internationally established global trading system there. Peter, would it be right? OK, let me ask you this. Would it be right for members of Parliament, after this referendum, to make a decision that the people had made a foolish decision and that they had the ability, as their representatives, to overturn it. Would that be constitutionally a reasonable and fair thing for MPs to do?
It will be their duty to do it, Nigel, because to stop people from causing self-harm, because those poor people and desperate people and naive people who fell for the lies, because people like Owen Paterson and Daniel Hannan, we're saying no one is talking about leaving single market.
I tell you what, Peter, why don't we abolish the electorate completely? Because clearly they're completely stupid. They're capable of being led up the garden path. Should we abolish democracy completely and just put some clever people in charge?
Absolutely not. We should be listening to our people. We should be advising. We should be taking into account their concerns. But what happens to people like you, Nigel? You're preying on people's fears.
Right.
You put in fears.
All right, Peter.
You claiming you have solution to the problem.
No, Peter, listen. You've had a good crack. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Peter says we should listen to the concerns of people. But if they're really stupid, we should cancel their referendum. Oh, I must need the smelling salts. After that one, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively at LBC, and it is 11:50. Well, my last caller, Peter from Wimbledon, thinks it is the duty of members of Parliament to overturn the referendum result because basically the voters didn't really know what they were voting on and being led up the garden path by myself and Boris Johnson. Heather on Twitter says that last caller, Peter, seems to think that MPs are a lot more intelligent than the rest of us. Oh dear. Yeah, that was the implication, wasn't it? I have to say, seems to me that the norms of representative democracy are overturned by this referendum because that decision was given to us and we were told with the £9 million pamphlet that dear David Cameron sent through our letterboxes that the result would be respected. Lots of thoughts on this on Facebook. Theophilis says, Churchill meant that MPs should first and foremost represent and serve the country. Of course, nowadays this is forgotten. Sometimes sacrifices on MPs' behalves are needed. And that's right. Sometimes if an MP really has a strong conscience on something, they have to perhaps risk the wrath of the whips of their parties and stand up for what they believe in. That's in normal times. But here, Theophilus, I think they have a duty to carry out the will of the people. I really do. Tina says MPs' duties are clearly to their constituents first. Too many of them have forgotten this for too long. Time to bring them back to earth with a bump and bring back accountability. Trouble is, Tina, with accountability, that even when you get general elections with dramatic swings, think of 97, for example, when, the Tories were wiped out and Labour got a huge majority. Even in those circumstances, 2/3 of constituencies in this country are safe Conservative or Labour seats, and they never, ever change. They stay that way for decade after decade after decade. So we don't really, with our electoral system, I feel, have full accountability in many ways. Rocco says democratic elections are the will and the voice of the people. The Brexit referendum was the will and voice of the people. Elected government is supposed to represent that voice. Well, Rocco, Theresa May says that by entering into a customs union until at least the end of 2021, she is representing the will of Brexit voters. I guess it's all, in the end, a matter of interpretation. But what should MPs do? Should they represent the 52% and make sure we get Brexit and leave on the 29th of March, or are they free to make their own decisions? Harry is calling from Waltham Forest. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, they're going to be facing, Harry, a big dilemma, aren't they? Because, you're going to have, for example, a Labour MP that represents a Yorkshire constituency that voted Leave by a big margin, and yet they themselves voted Remain. What should they do?
Well, unfortunately, we've had the last 2 years of pantomime where the MPs of both major parties, Labour and Conservative, have put party before country. And this is far, far too important to do that. Country comes first.
As Churchill said all those years ago. So it's country before party. It's a slogan. I think it's a very good slogan, Harry. And do you think this is something that is going through our MPs' minds at the moment?
No, I think too many of our MPs are thinking of the next election and where they stand in the party and can they get into the shadow cabinet or the cabinet.
You are so... I can't bear people like you coming on this show displaying this level of cynicism about our career politicians, most of whom, Harry, have never had a proper job in their lives. You're quite right. All they're worried about is the next election. I think that's right. Harry, do you think our MPs are ultimately this autumn going to honour the will of the people or not?
Unfortunately, quite a few of them will not.
Quite a few will
They're
not.
thinking entirely of their own careers, their own chances of the future. They're the chances. They're in there for the main chance. If they see an opportunity, they'll take it. They have no morals, no scruples.
Well, Harry, I have to say you've disappointed me on this Sunday morning with this tone, but you're completely and utterly right. Thank you. Country before party at last, I get on Twitter. They should listen to the voters, says Harry on Twitter. The voters, Nigel. The people who voted them in. That's who MPs should represent. The populace. It's called democracy, says John in Lincolnshire. Judith is calling from Yeovil. Judith, who's your local MP, Judith?
Marcus Fish.
And to whom do you think Marcus Fish owes his ultimate loyalty?
Well, I think he's a Brexiteer and a staunch Brexiteer.
Right.
So I shall be watching closely to see what he does.
Yep.
But as regards this issue, I wouldn't say country before party. I would say uphold the democratic process, because those MPs would say to you, their answer to country before party is, we're doing this because we think it's in the best interests of the country.
Yes, they could well do that.
They could, and that is the get-out they would have. I would say the democratic process has to be upheld. Otherwise, we're travelling down a very dangerous road.
So what if our MPs decided at some point this autumn that actually what really needed to happen is that we, the British people, needed to vote again in a second referendum? How would that, what would that do you think, to our faith and trust in democracy in this country?
Well, I think certainly I can't speak for anybody else. I can only speak for myself. But my faith and trust in the democratic process in this country has been completely corrupted. I don't believe it exists anymore. I don't have any faith in our process anymore. The system is broken. And the whole dilemma these MPs are in over Brexit has shown that the system is broken. It also demonstrates that MPs don't understand what their role is. And that is because we have had MPs who have been emasculated by being 45 years in Brussels. They've become nothing more than glorified county councillors.
And yet, Judith, they don't see it. They think they're actually in charge, making legislation, but they're not really, are they? Most of it's been made somewhere else. Judith, if your faith is broken in the British democratic system, is there anything that could be done to restore that faith?
Yes, I think that there needs to be somebody step forward now to the plate and say, needs to challenge May. May needs to be replaced.
Well,
and they need to take us forward and say, we will implement Brexit, which is what the people chose.
So you see May being replaced as part of the process of getting the Brexit people voted for?
Yes.
OK, Judith, thank you for that. Interesting. Well, Nigel, it isn't just the government who should support the will of the people. All of Parliament should support the will of the people. Our MPs are happy to sit in their parliamentary seats, having been democratically elected. It is therefore the ultimate hypocrisy that so many of them are now happy to show they don't actually support the democracy with a referendum result. Jerry and Peterhead, that is, I have to say, I completely understand that those who voted Remain, those MPs who believed in Remain, were upset by the result. Equally, back in 1975, you had people like Tony Benn, Michael Foot, Enoch Powell, for example, who supported leaving the EEC. They lost the referendum. They didn't like losing the referendum, but they respected the fact they'd lost it, and the issue was dead. The issue was completely dead for about the next 20 years. And the difference here, Jerry, is that the losers in this case just do not, and it seems to me in many cases will not, accept that result. Chris is calling from Trowbridge. Chris, good morning.
Hi, Nigel. Hi, this is a very complex question, isn't it?
It is, but I'm asking it because, I really do think that when it comes to these final divisions on Mrs May's bill, and I don't know whether it'll happen, but we may find, amendments coming before the Commons on second referendums or whatever it is. Our MPs are going to be bombarded by their constituents and bombarded by their party whips. And I'm really asking this ultimate question of to whom should they owe their loyalty in this very special case?
Sure. Well, you see, in our parliamentary democracy, the way it works at the moment probably stems back to Simon de Montfort in the 13th century.
Yep.
And what we're looking at MPs are representatives. They're not delegates. They're representatives. So their main. The main thing that they should be doing is doing what they feel is best for the country and for their constituents. Now, also, I'd just like to say one thing. Also, remember Thatcher said referendums were the device of dictators and demagogues. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that distilling a question to something as simple as this and implying that there is, in some way, democracy is in some way being usurped by MPs acting as representatives rather than delegates, is the kind of question a demagogue would ask.
Well, I don't think Switzerland is a country that is open to demagoguery at all. And, of course, you can call a referendum there on local issues, on canton issues, and indeed on national issues, and it works incredibly effectively. Much of America, of course, operates on ballot measures. Every November, people can vote on a variety of things, whether to legalise cannabis in their state or whatever else it may be. And America is a very democratic system indeed. They can sack they can sack people, and they do, The general big point here is right, isn't it? That our MPs aren't delegates. That they represent us for a period of time, and we judge them at the end of that time.
Yeah.
But don't you think, Chris, that in the case of this referendum, that actually, because they asked us to make this decision, they are delegated actually and honour bound to carry it out?
I think if we were to take the 1975 referendum, where a supermajority won, then I think you are right. But of course, because the majority was so slim, and the will of the people, in inverted commas, is transient. It changes. In the referendum in 2016, that's effectively, because it was so close, it's effectively an opinion poll on one day in June 2016. It
was 4%. It's quite a lot, really, isn't it?
That can change from day to day. It's that slim.
I don't agree with that. I don't quite agree with that. I understand that it's not 2/3 a third as 1975 was, and I take that point absolutely, of course, as being a very valid point. But Chris, if this referendum was not to be delivered and we were forced to vote again, what do you think that would do to people's trust in democracy?
Well, I think the argument against. I'm going to contradict myself now because
Well, you said it was complex, Chris. Chris, I tell you what. I'm out of time. I've enjoyed the conversation. This is a very difficult debate, but please get involved in it. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 11:30, and we're discussing MPs, where their loyalties lie. Do they lie to you, the constituent, or to their party whips? What are they going to do? They've been told by the electorate in a referendum, take us out of the European Union. Is that what they really should do when these big votes come up, or will they do something else? And what are the implications of that for our trust and faith in democracy? But it's October, and it's windy. Maybe nothing exceptional in that, you may say, but when a storm with a name makes its way across the Atlantic, you can expect there's going to be some drama and some damage. I was in Torquay yesterday. It was pretty windy, also very mild. But I understand in parts of Wales the situation was much more serious. Helping us to explain all of this is legendary weatherman John Ketley. Good morning, John.
Yes, good morning, Nigel.
So, storms with names.
Lovely.
Is this a new thing? Sort of each big low-pressure system has a name or not?
Well, it came in the UK about 4 years ago. It was a joint venture with the Met Office and the UK Iran people, the Met Office people in Ireland.
Yep.
So they developed these names, which is actually a thing that's been put out to the public. The public can actually issue their own ideas of what the name should be for each alphabetical letter.
So, what, do you mean rather like a referendum, or?
Well, yes, you only get one chance.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you get one chance at sending in your names, and then they choose the ones that they prefer. So anyway, this is about the third or fourth season they've been doing this sort of thing.
Yep.
I think it's very good for people to recognise the fact that if it's got a name, it's going to be more media savvy. If you know what I mean. The media will pick up on that, and we'll continue to hear about it while it's going on.
So, I mean, I kind of associate October with big, strong southwesterly gales and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
How serious was this storm? Because we did see pictures of quite devastating flooding in parts of Wales.
Yeah, Wales was really badly hit, and then that heaviest rain went up into Cumbria yesterday. So they've had about, the best part of 150 to 200 millimetres in the mountains of Brecon Beacons and Snowdonia, and then the Cumbrian Fells. So there's been an awful lot of rain up in the hills, and all that rain's got to come back down into the valleys, hasn't it, then out to sea. So an awful lot of flooding around, a lot of saturated ground now after what's been a very dry year, really, for most parts of the UK. So it's been a big change, but of course, it's been a change that's been expected because it's the sort of thing that happens, as you mentioned, really every October.
Yeah.
It's residual thunderstorms or tropical storms coming across the Atlantic, which get embedded into our jet stream, and this is the natural result. It's a perennial problem.
And 150 to 200 millimetres of rain in inches is?
Well, 8 inches for 200, there you are.
Okay.
But you're not still working in the past, are you, Nigel? I thought you were a man of the future.
I tell you what's interesting about a country that's sort of gone part metric or half metric, or is that colloquially people still talk in pounds and ounces and feet and inches. They're very, even though they're being taught differently at school, colloquially they still do.
That's right. And what about horse racing? They're still talking about furlongs.
Furlongs, yeah. So no, we've kind of got half and half, and we still talk miles, and we've kind of got half and half. So looking ahead, John, do we see anything exceptional coming up between now and Christmas?
Before Christmas? Well, that's an awful long time away now.
Well, I know, but you know, this is what you do for a living. I'm putting you on the spot.
Of course, because of my track record for the past 12 months, you think I'm so good that I'm going to keep on. Well,
you made a couple of big calls earlier this year, and so hey, keep double or quits, ride your luck while it's still in.
Well, I'll tell you what, because I'm not absolutely certain at the moment, I'll talk about what's already happened. Yesterday was the warmest day ever so late in a year.
I mentioned that,
26.5 degrees in Lincolnshire. That's never occurred before, well, since comprehensive records since 1860. So it was the warmest day we've seen. We're on the slide now. Temperatures aren't going to get anywhere near as high as that again this year. So we're going back a little bit more to normality. It's certainly a very wet day today across England and East Wales. So there's torrential rain coming down. There's been about 20 millimetres this morning in places like Berkshire and Hampshire. So this rain's going to continue on and off throughout today and through tonight and well into tomorrow across England, whereas we've got glorious blue skies now across Ireland into western Scotland. So there's a big improvement coming along for the northwest of the UK, whereas really the southeast of Britain's going to hang on to this rain well into tomorrow. And then we go back to what, as I say, is normality. We go back to, of course, the 16th of October is Tuesday. That's the anniversary of the Great Storm of 87, which many of us do remember so fondly.
Yeah, quite.
But looking ahead for the next 2 or 3 weeks, yes, we'll have bands of rain coming across and we'll have some warmer days, but equally we'll have some colder nights and there'll be snow in the mountains of Scotland occasionally.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed. That was John Ketley explaining that we're only into our 4th year now of having names for these storms, but it does seem to kind of make us even more interested, I think, in talking about the weather than we ever were before. Back to our members of Parliament. Is Churchill right? Is putting country first the thing? Or, in the wake of this referendum, could that be interpreted either way? Pat says country should always come first. Lou says, I'll repeat what I've said many times. A general election is based on a democratic vote. If we don't like the party that wins, do we get another go at that? No. What's the difference? Every election is an opinion poll on that particular day, says David Farrell, in response to my previous caller, Chris, who suggested that actually there is an argument for having another referendum because the margin wasn't big enough. It's not a view that I accept, but hey, Sally is calling from Kingston. Good morning, Sally.
Good morning, Nigel. Nigel, the name for the biggest wind of change in this country. So how's that?
Well, I was actually in the break joking that we've not had a storm, Nigel, but maybe British politics is suffering the aftermath of it.
If only we could have a storm, Nigel, and we could leave the EU. And I'm absolutely fed up of listening to all the Remoaners, all the people against leaving, doom and gloom. I mean, looking at the EU, what about the doom and gloom there? I mean, it's catastrophic. That even the IMF is predicting great big failures.
Do you know, Sally, when I hear this idea being put that being part of the European Union is so fantastic for our economy, and it's nearly always put by the same people who said that joining the euro was the right thing to do, and you look at what has happened to the youth of Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain, and you realise just how much harm this project has done.
But the waste of money, the amount of money that could have gone into real projects, not into corruption, as you see in Italy, and false, I don't know, fanciful projects that have really achieved nothing in terms of employment or bringing up people or education or anything. I'm actually quite shocked how people can see Europe as something wonderful. I just wonder if the people who want to stay have all got villas in the south of France or homes in Spain.
I know. It's funny, and sadly we get these rock stars who seem to think Europe is some wonderful new thing, and actually it's sort of authoritarian and undemocratic. Sally, when it comes this autumn, do you think our MPs are going to do the right thing as you see it?
Well, I'm really banking on Dominic Raab on absolutely standing firm.
Okay.
I mean, I think he's doing quite a good job, and I actually hope that he'll resign if we go for this Chequers deal, which is absolutely catastrophic.
Actually, Chequers minus, I think, is where we are now with the customs union
Chequers
deal.
in any form, forget it.
By this time next week, Sally, we will know exactly where Dominic Raab stands on all of this. All right, so.
For somewhere else if it turns out to be Chequers, because I think that an awful lot of good people will want to leave, and Australia and New Zealand and Canada and all those places will benefit from a brain drain.
Well, we saw that back in the 1970s, and we do not want to go there again. Sally, I thank you. Country first, if Brexit is to be such a disaster, all the Ramonas, including Blair and Major, should have voted Liberal at the last election, says Martin in Ramsgate. We've got a very fair point that the Liberal Democrats were the only major party, standing in the last election on a very, very clear ticket of staying part of the European Union. MPs are voted in by their constituents and should therefore represent them. If they're voted in on a mandate to leave the EU, then it's their duty to fulfil that, unless substantial material arises to prove a change in the constituents' views. Yeah, OK, it can get very complicated, this, can't it? To have a functioning democracy, you need to provide the electorate with proper facts to enable them to make an educated vote. You cannot claim a democratic victory when you have misrepresented the truth. Just another tweet you won't read out, Nigel. Mark, I'm used to misrepresentations. I'm used to lies. 50 years of lies. 50 years of being told it's just a common market. Don't worry your little heads. It'll never lead to political union. 50 years of lies. 50 years of them spending our money telling us how wonderful it was. A £9 million leaflet through our door from Mr. Cameron. Oh, I tell you what, Mark, we know all about misrepresentations of truth. We've been through decades of it. Nigel, MPs act as delegates when they take up a cause or a complaint for an individual constituent, don't they? Why is that OK and not the Brexit wishes of their electorate? Well, Susie, yes, there are times when an MP does pick up a particular cause. A constituent's been put in prison, perhaps, and they can't see what the evidence is, and they'll ask that question at Prime Minister's questions. But actually, they're still acting as representatives, not delegates, I would argue, in that situation. I just think, folks, that the referendum was so fundamental that it's their job in this case to be delegates. And if they don't, they will do lasting damage to faith in democracy in this country. I believe that strongly. Tell me I'm wrong. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 11:45. Winston Churchill's head that an MP's first duty is to the honour and safety of his country. That would now be his or her, of course, country. We have been used to a system for centuries where our members of Parliament are not delegates, they're representatives, they make their own decisions, but we've had an historic referendum that I believe gives an instruction to our MPs to carry out the will of the people. Am I right about this? Jennifer is calling from Ealing. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, Nigel.
So,
I think you're exactly right about this, because we had the biggest turnout, as I understand it, in political, voting, but with the referendum.
It was absolutely accurate to say that the referendum was the greatest and biggest exercise of democracy in the history of our nation.
Quite. So therefore, instead of all this derision and point scoring and scaremongering, I think all MPs of all parties are duty bound to make this the best that it could be for this country. And Theresa May has gone there on her own. We don't know what she said to them half the time. She hasn't taken anybody with her that could argue for this country.
Jennifer, she's had she's had the civil servant Ollie Robbins with her.
Yeah, well, quite. That's the civil servants don't want to come out of the EU. So, but then the other thing is, why haven't we had a plan drawn up for what this country could be like with a no deal, so that people can see the positives? And also, why haven't we had a plan drawn up about the negatives for the EU? It's all very one-sided, and Rees-Mogg is exactly right when he says that we're being bullied, because we are, and she is a very dogmatic woman who, I can't. If Churchill had acted like Theresa May's acting, we would never have won a war. He brought the people of the country together to believe in the country and to fight what was our democratic right.
Yeah, but Jennifer, come on. Churchill, history shows Churchill as the victor. I mean, many people thought he was being too dogmatic. I mean, many people, right up to the Foreign Secretary, thought maybe we should do a deal with Mr. Hitler. Maybe in a way, Churchill's dogmatism on the Nazis proved to be his strength.
Well, yeah, because as regarding the war, we were sort of in danger of being invaded. So Churchill had to stand firm and couldn't really argue, because Hitler was going to invade us come what may, and that turned out to be. And
of course, history likes a winner, doesn't it? No, absolutely. Yeah. But Jennifer, what do you think is going to happen this autumn? I mean, do you think? And you clearly believe in Brexit from everything you're saying on this conversation. Do you think our MPs ultimately will hold faith with the people?
No, I think there's too many sort of politics involved, if you like. If we have a general election, will Jeremy Corbyn get in? If there's a no vote for Theresa May, say she is going to be spiteful about it all, and she will call an election. So I think in the end of the day, they're going to go along with this watered down. No Brexit actually, because if she's saying we can negotiate in 6 months' time, we've had 2 years. 6 months' time, it means we'll never negotiate. Because if she comes out with this watered down version, that's how it's going to be. And the watered down version is virtually no Brexit.
Brexit in name only, Jennifer. That's what it is. That really is what it is. Nigel, I voted and campaigned in my local town, posting and handing out pro-Remain leaflets. However, because I'm a Democrat, before I'm a Eurocrat, I believe we have no choice but to leave the EU. There may not necessarily be a pro-Leave majority in the country, but there is a pro-democracy majority out there, says Dominic in Banbury. Dominic, I think you're right, and I think to force a second referendum on this issue before we've left and find out how it all works out would be monstrous. I really do. David is calling from Eastleigh. Good morning, David.
Hello, good morning, Nigel. I must say it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, it's good to have you on. So tell me, MPs, they're not there to be our delegates under normal circumstances, but surely with this referendum they are.
Well, actually, I've read there's parliamentary notes, as you would expect, as to what an MP should be doing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely worth people looking those up. It's very clear on there. It doesn't use the word delegation, and I think for good reason. It uses the word representative.
Yes.
So what the notes actually say, and this is a parliamentary House of Commons own document, it says Parliament has the duties of an MP are to represent their party's vote in accordance with their party. It's also to represent constituents, not just those that voted for them. So taking that example, it does create a bit of a problem for us, Nigel, I think, because if you take Sarah Woolston in Totnes, who, her constituency voted unanimously to leave.
Well, David, not unanimously, but it did vote to leave, all right.
Well, yeah, and that depends on whether you say, we're not in proportional representation. We're a first past the post system. So, a majority is a majority, Nigel, I think, in terms of
Sure.
Okay, and then you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, which interestingly, they voted the other way, I think. I think I'm correct in saying that, so they voted Remain.
No.
But actually, of course, he's very actively campaigning to leave.
No. I mean, the people, David, with the biggest dilemma on this are the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Are the Labour Party, because, two-thirds of Labour seats in England and Wales had Leave votes. So out there you've got, a lot of Labour MPs. There'll be 100 plus Labour MPs out there facing a dilemma. Their constituents voted Leave and probably still very much want Leave to happen. And yet their party now wants, well, I'm not quite sure what they want, but it looks like stay in maybe the single market, maybe go for a second referendum. And I think they're the ones, there'll be Tories too, but they're the ones that'll face a real dilemma.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, democracy will have the final word. If every MP voted in line with a referendum, democracy would work. Parliament would not be stuck like it is with MPs that will vote down anything just for the sake of it, for their party political gain and personal interest. I think personally, Nigel, I think parties should be calling in dissenting MPs and asking them to come in line with either with their party and their party policy and also the democratic vote of the UK. Particularly, I appeal to the Conservatives, because I'm a 30-year voting Conservative member that flipped across to UKIP for 2 years to try and see Brexit through the door. And I think they should be calling in their dissenting MPs, reminding them of their obligations as MPs to deliver on democracy. Now, obviously, I don't think Labour are going to do that because we don't know where they stand anyway.
And the trouble is, David, that Theresa May's interpretation of honouring the Brexit vote is very, very different to Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Davis, and indeed Boris, who said this could precipitate the worst crisis since Suez. David, thank you. Nigel, you keep quoting Churchill. He also said the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. It's time MPs grew some and withdrew us from this ridiculous process. I make no apologies. James, Churchill may well have said that. He also said that democracy was a deeply flawed system, just rather better than anything else that mankind had yet invented. So we're all very good at selectively quoting Churchill, aren't we? I am pretty much out of time this morning. It's a very interesting debate. A lot of our MPs are going to face great challenges over the course of the next few months, being pulled in all directions. My last message comes from Lynn on Facebook, and she says, every time a new treaty was signed, it should have been put to the people. If they did, perhaps we wouldn't be in this mess. And that, Lynn, is the argument that Tony Benn made from the 1960s right through to his death a few years ago. He said, actually, we should never, ever, ever have gone deeper into this European club without MPs asking the people, because they never had the authority to do it. They were only our representatives for a short period of time, and they handed over powers illegally. That's all history. We have voted to leave. Let's hope our MPs make sure that we do that. I'm back tomorrow night at 6. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.